I want to talk about. Look, you follow this a lot more than I do, and you're extremely well versed on what's happening with U.S. politics right now. But I want to focus on it from the perspective of the foreign policy differences that exist. If Harris wins, if Trump wins, I know this is a really big playing field that I'm setting in front of you, but lay out what you see as the key differences between those two potential administrations from a foreign policy perspective.
Ooh. It's fascinating because this is one place where you've seen the really a merger occur, Mike, of the old Cheney neocon wing of the Republican Party and the Democrat uniparty interventionists. I know that's kind of a lot of jargon, but effectively, the Democrat Party is the party of the machine state, and that includes certainly the federal bureaucracy, which you and I come out of, where we are anomalies, just so everybody knows. I mean, Mike was with the cool kids, but I was with the analysts and, a bunch of like cringing betas down in the basement writing reports and stuff. They were all either Bernie Sanders or
Wait a
Kamala
second.
or,
Hold on. I gotta stop you right there, man. The way you just described that makes it sound like it was the jocks and the nerds, like somehow the ops guys were walking by giving you guys wedgies over in the DI, and that's not the way it works. No, that wasn't the way.
Case officers
when I was
by there. Case officers are like, write me another report.
No,
Anyway.
we were always impressed. We were always impressed with how smart you guys were and how you could take some of the shit that we were collecting.
Smart. I will say my office, the Iraq office, which I worked in, not to get too far afield here, but the Iraq office, which you had to sort of like internally, you had to be chosen for it, like you had to apply, and because they were kind of sifting out, and you basically had to say, I'm willing to go to Iraq, I'll help any way I can. So the Iraq office was actually a lot of ex-mil guys. We had SF guys, we had Marine Recon who came in and were analysts. So I am kidding, but there are a lot of cringing mutants who are analysts. So that's in some of the other offices. Anyway, put that aside for a second. Back to the differences in the party and where I see a huge amount of daylight. I mean, the Republican Party's, I think, most painful lesson of the last 20 years has been the legacy of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that Donald Trump has been a big part of learning that lesson not just learning it, but applying it in a meaningful way in terms of the foreign policy philosophy of the right. It has moved not just to an America First posture, but to a highly non-interventionist posture, meaning unless there's a critical U.S. interest that will be achieved by the force of arms, we should not be involved. The Democrats do not take that perspective. The Democrats, as we know, whether it's the Obama administration and the numerous foreign policy debacles there, including their role in Libya, we all saw 13 hours, and what happened in Syria, the Syrian civil war. The beginning, I might add, of the Russia invasion of Ukraine was that people forget this, but it stretches back to I'm trying to remember even the year now. It's like 7 or 8 years going back now, and it also the seizure of Crimea occurred, through referendum under Barack Obama's tenure, right? So these are all lessons that I think have been reflected in the way Trump approaches things. With Kamala Harris, you get this. It's weird, right? Because on the one hand, you have all these beta males like the current Secretary of State Blinken and this multilateral international institution-based view of how the U.S. should operate in the world, but also the deployment of U.S. troops or U.S. materiel, money, in places where it's not really clear what our objective is. You can make sort of a human rights or human policy argument about it. So, do you know what I mean? I think that there's been a massive philosophical shift where the Democrats are now much more inclined to get us involved in military adventurism abroad that doesn't have a clear U.S. interest because they haven't learned the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan and others. And so that's where I think the main switch is. And that's kind of a long answer, but I think it's an important topic.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually right on the money. If I'm not mistaken, I think Nikki Haley, when she was talking about her switch over to the Republican Party, said one of the reasons was because she felt the Democrats had become the party of war, and
yeah,
it is for those of us old enough to remember it is quite the switch, in terms of how the parties are perceived on the international front when it comes to conflict. With Ukraine, there's a lot of talk about if Trump wins, right? What that means for Ukraine, what that means for the EU in terms of their support for Ukraine. How do you view that? Where do you think he would go with this?
I think that I know this is like a favorite topic of a lot of particularly I think the Never Trump right. I mean, they act like Trump's BFF relationship with Vladimir Putin is somehow both disqualifying for Trump to be commander in chief again, and then also goes to a lack of loyalty to America. I mean, I'm just saying that's the argument that certainly you get from Democrats on the Russia collusion and Putin stuff, but you also get that from sort of that old school Cheney interventionist Republican Bush era GWAT folks, and here's what I would say about the way that we can break all this stuff down. Russia, yeah, Trump has this. I think you could call it a respect. He says it. He's told me that before in interviews. He has a respect for Putin's abilities. He's sort of a worthy adversary. But you look at what happened while Trump was president vis-a-vis Russia, right, Mike? You look at things like, I think it was 50 or 60 diplomats expelled from the U.S., which to a lot of people, that's like who cares? That's in diplomatic relations. If you're going to talk about what the State Department can do, that's a pretty strong move. I'll give you something stronger than that, though. The Barack Obama's administration, and I debated Obama's national security advisor on Ukraine issues. I mean, it was like Eurasia, I forget. He was the National Security Council guy for Eurasia, focusing on Ukraine. Obama's team wouldn't give lethal munitions to Ukraine. And when the first invasion happened, right, they were sending blankets and helmets. Trump comes along, people forget this now, and actually says, okay, look, if we're going to do this, let's actually do this. Let's not, mess around, and he sent the Javelin missile system, which was critical, especially as the Russian armor was so far beyond the capabilities of the Ukrainians at that point to resist, and also sent long-range sniper rifles, which, as you know, Mike, the warfare over there is effectively trench warfare. It's like this hybrid of new tech with the drones and the digitized, our artillery. It's like a game of Risk with artillery shells going on, and everyone using digitized communication to pinpoint accuracy. And then you have guys in trenches like it's the First World War, long-range rifles, Dragunov sniper rifles, things like that. Trump gave that to Ukraine. Obama wouldn't do it. So and then there's I want to call it 150 some odd Russian paramilitaries, Wagner Group guys that they took out in the Syrian desert. I mean, I know you know this, but I just think for people to hear this and remember, Trump is the guy that will bend over and do anything for Russia, but he's expelling the diplomats, he's giving lethal munitions to Ukraine, and he's giving the okay as commander-in-chief for operations that include blowing hundreds of Russians out of the sand. You know what I'm saying? Like, so this is, I think, an important part of the history that people need to remember. And then for how this plays out for the EU, for NATO, and for the conflict right now with Ukraine and Russia, I would just say there's going to have to be a negotiated settlement, and Putin isn't going to negotiate. Putin is never going to feel pressure from the Democrat administration of Kamala Harris to do anything. I think he just views her as laughable. Honestly, I view her as laughable. I think that Joe Biden, even with senility, is a more formidable statesman, despite the dementia, than Kamala Harris is. I think with Donald Trump, you can sit down and say, look, what's it going to be to stop this? If you don't, I'm going to find ways to turn the heat up that actually bother you. Not enough that you're going to be able to get away with a major military escalation, but I'm going to make things hurt more. I can. Let's get a deal done. Let's stop the killing. That's how I see a Trump administration on Ukraine, Russia moving forward. And on NATO and EU stuff, they were saying this, remember, Mike, the whole time, oh, NATO allies need to pay more. He was right. He's right. One thing about Trump is you can't rip him off, right? I mean, whatever's in the contract, he's going to expect that money to get paid. Like, you're not going to get away with that. And these European countries were getting a free ride, and he called them out, and he was right. But I don't see there as being any harm done to the transatlantic relationship or anything like that under Trump. If anything, I think that calling them to account strengthens things over the long term.